Hello, everyone. Welcome to Skeptical Inquirer Presents. This is a series of live online presentations from experts who are devoted to advancing science over pseudoscience, media literacy over conspiracy theories, and critical thinking over magical thinking. My name is Leanne Lord, and I am delighted to be your host. I am a stand-up comedian, author, Center for Inquiry Fellow, and fellow Earth dweller. As you get settled in, I'll share that today is National Wine Day. That's wine, W-I-N-E. I do the other kind of whining every day. So cheers to those of you who might indeed be raising a glass. And for you Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fans, today is Towel Day. To quote author Douglas Adams, hey, you sass that Hoopy Ford prefect? There's a fruit who really knows where his towel is. That's right. I'm a nerd. I know you're shocked. A couple of quick reminders. CFI's podcast, Point of Inquiry, is available wherever you get your podcasts. And if you haven't already, you can round out your reading list with a subscription to Skeptical Inquirer magazine by subscribing at skepticalinquirer.org. So easy. And it is not too early to start getting excited about SciCon 2023. It'll be October 26th through 29th in Las Vegas, the epicenter of critical thinking. I'll be there, and I hope you can join us. And now, as we get started, please feel free to type your questions for our guest about the topic into the Q&A, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can. Our guest tonight is Oliver Milman, an environment correspondent for The Guardian US. He's the author of The Insect Crisis, The Fall of the Tiny Empires That Run the World, which, by the way, gets my vote for best book subtitle. Now, full disclosure, I've been deeply bug phobic since early childhood, and so my knowledge about them is quite thin. For example, I didn't know that 3 out of 4 of every known animal species on Earth are insects. I didn't know that they predate dinosaurs, and that even with that prominence and longevity, insect numbers are plummeting around the world. And it's not just the bees. Oliver's critically acclaimed book tackles the questions and implications of this, such as what crucial roles do insects play to prop up ecosystems and food webs? And what happens when this status quo is threatened? What does it mean to us culturally, morally, artistically to lose the beauty of a butterfly, the flicker of a firefly, the industrious buzz of a bumblebee? What is causing all of this to happen, and what can we do about it? Our guest is here to let us know. Oliver Milman is a British journalist who has written environmental issues for The Guardian in Australia and the United States. He has extensively covered the climate emergency, documenting its impact on the Arctic, the Great Barrier Reef, the Everglades, and numerous other places and communities. So please welcome to the Skeptical Inquirer Presents screen, Oliver Milman. Hey, Oliver, thank you for being with us tonight. I'm looking forward to what you have to say.
Hey, Leanne, thanks so much for that very generous introduction, and thank you to Skeptical Inquirer, to Barry Carr, and everyone else who made this happen. I really appreciate it, and for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today about what most of us would know as bugs, but the entomologists here will know they're more accurately collectively known as insects. Want to talk to you about their decline, and as Leanne says, what's causing that and what we can do about it. It's a topic I was drawn to as during my time as the environment correspondent for The Guardian US, and the Insect Crisis book is the kind of distillation of all kinds of different thoughts and experiences I've had around this topic over the last couple of years. So I want to talk to you about that crisis. But first, I do want to kind of take you back a bit through the mists of time to around 410 million years ago. It's the Paleozoic period. It's a time before dinosaurs were around, and the world looks radically different to now. It's around this time we see the first insects as we would know them. today. The earliest confirmed fossil of an insect was found pancaked in some sandstone in Scotland from around this time. They have a slow start to life on Earth, insects, but they're among the first animals to take flight, the first to be able to digest plants, and they're pioneers in developing camouflage to avoid predators. They're also, in some cases, absolutely enormous. One of my favorite insects from prehistory is this kind of gargantuan dragonfly-like insect called Meganura, which lived in the swamp forests of what's now Illinois. It had a wingspan of 28 inches, which is similar to that of a mallard duck. So that mallard duck-like dragonfly gives us a hint of what was to come in terms of the incredible array of life of insects, their weird and wonderful forms. One entomologist told me when I was writing the book that insects are kind of otherworldly. They're kind of like aliens on Earth. And yet, despite their kind of strange appearance sometimes, they're very much part of the fabric of what makes Earth Earth. They help create and have helped created what makes our planet what it is today. So if you spool through geologic time, you see that insects are the world's great survivors. They tenaciously hang on as 5 mass extinctions strip away a life from the planet, including the dinosaurs. They develop this intricate dance with plants, which I would say is perhaps the most successful relationship there's ever been on Earth. Scientists recently cracked open some rocks in Russia. This research was just published fairly recently in the last few weeks, and they found these earwig-like insects encased in sediment that lived an estimated 280 million years ago. They had clumps of pollen on their bodies, making them perhaps the world's first pollinators, predating the dinosaurs. This is about 100 million years prior to when we initially thought we first had pollinators. So it's been this incredibly long-lasting and successful relationship on which so much our terrestrial world hinges. Insects become the catalyst for the terrestrial world. In fact, they propagate almost everything that blossoms and becomes food. They replenish the soils and the trees. They decompose of waste. They become intrinsic to life here. Even before we started shredding their world, insects left their imprint on our own human history when we came along. During the American Revolution, the British Army was so ravaged by malaria that Southern Commander Lord Cornwallis sought to withdraw to the north to avoid what he called the fatal sickness, which so nearly ruined the army. Instead, he was ordered to hold Yorktown, where his depleted forces were overcome by American and French troops, prompting the end of the war, which is obviously a very delicate subject for me, but it's instructive, I feel. As a result of this military collapse, the historian Timothy Weingard has called the common marsh mosquito the founding mother of the United States. So there you have it. You have George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, and the marsh mosquito. What a trio. You jump forward another 100 years and the invention of the modern beehive box for honeybees in the town of Oxford in Ohio. It transforms agriculture as we know it. Previously, farmers had a large plot of land. They couldn't possibly harvest all their fruit and vegetables from it because they weren't the pollinators to support such a yield. Now, with this kind of mobile box of indentured bee helpers, landowners could pollinate sprawling tracts of land, paving the way to the kind of industrialized, high production, streamlined system overseen by large agricultural corporations that now gobbles up so much of the planet. That's the system we have today. It's also a system that's very destructive, but we will get to that. Go forward a little bit further in time. You get to the 1940s, and guess what the first animal in space becomes? Is it a dog? Is it a cat? Is it a monkey, perhaps? No, it is in fact a fruit fly, which is propelled beyond the atmosphere and a US military rocket in 1947 in an attempt to ascertain potential impact of cosmic radiation on astronauts. There is no statue for this fruit fly to mark its incredible sacrifice to the world of science, but we will remember it here today. Insects, it feels like, are everywhere. They are omnipotent, it feels like. 3 out of every 4 known animal species, as Leanne said, on Earth are insects. The number of fly species is at least 4 times larger than all the different types of fish found in the world's oceans. The assassin fly, a creature that spends its time glamorously sucking out the internal organs of other prey insects. There's 7,000 types of this assassin fly. That's more than all the species of mammals in the world. Every type of whale, monkey, bear out there, and more, of course. They are just legion in number and diversity. They possess not only sheer numbers, but incredible abilities too. I found out through the writing of this book that some ants act as paramedics to other ants, so organized are their societies. One type of water beetle called the Japanese water scavenger beetle can survive being eaten by a frog by swimming through the frog's stomachs and then crawling out of its bottom. Paper wasps can recognize other individual wasps just by looking at their faces. Bees, meanwhile, I think have a claim to be the most remarkable creatures on Earth. They can fly as high as Mount Kilimanjaro is tall and perform feats of logistics that no human ever could hope to replicate. Also, despite having the brain the size of a poppy seed, bees have a surprising mental acuity. They can learn, scientists have theorized, from negative experiences, even showing signs of trauma when placed in a frightening situation. Levels of dopamine and serotonin increase in bees when they receive a sweet treat, much like humans when we get an ice cream, and they drop when they face danger. They can understand, again, scientists have theorized through research, bees can understand the concept of zero. They can add and subtract numbers, and even be trained to detect landmines, even better than sniffer dogs. You can teach a bumblebee to play soccer, and afterwards, if you peer into its hive at night, you may see that it will give up sleep to care for its hive's young. These traits have all pointed to a theory that bees have a form of consciousness, not like that of humans perhaps, but it's clear that they're not the buzzing, empty automatons that we might first think. They are better than that, and we should be better than thinking of them like that. They're much more than that. So it can seem impossible to us, given that history, given those abilities, that insects could in any way be in any sort of existential danger. It can also seem impossible that they're in danger given our own day-to-day interactions with them. They're perhaps the closest animals to us other than our cats and dogs, and most of our encounters with them can seem unpleasant. If you think about the bite or the sting, annoying fly hovering over your food, an ant marching into your kitchen, which happened to me while I was writing the book. A whole army of ants invaded my apartment kitchen, which felt kind of appropriate, especially as I was unable to get rid of them through any kind of means, and they essentially became my roommates. They seem to be everywhere. Everything, everywhere, all at once. That's insects. And yet, despite this, as I outline in my book, The Insect Crisis, insects are suffering a sort of silent catastrophe. A catastrophe far away from the headlines we see around conservation issues, harm to the environment, climate change. They're suffering this kind of background disaster. They are disappearing from our environment at an alarming rate in places around the world. We may well be witnessing the most consequential extinction event in Earth's history, in fact, since the dinosaurs. And it isn't centered upon elephants or tigers or polar bears, but it's upon what E.O. Wilson famously called the little things that run the world. Those are insects. So what do we know about this crisis. The picture is far from complete, as anybody with a scientifically rigorous background will know. We do not have full data from all around the world about what's happening with insect numbers from every place. We don't know much what's happening in the tropics, for example, which is that great trove of insect life. But the evidence we do have from elsewhere has so far been, I think it's fair to say, fairly horrifying. It seemed previously pointless to many scientists to count insects. The great joy in entomology was finding new species or documenting their behaviors. But a whole host of studies started coming out from around 2017 that really laid bare the sheer magnitude of this insect crisis. We were kind of playing a game which we didn't keep the score in previously. Now we started to keep the score, and we found that insects, as well as us, are losing quite badly. So where can we trace the first hints of this alarm? Through research. I think it's fair to say that in terms of the public's imagination, we can look to a piece of research from 2017 that analysed the contents of traps in 63 protected nature areas across Germany. It showed that the annual average weight of flying insects had slumped by 76% since 1989. The situation in the height of summer, when insect numbers reached their apex, of course, was even worse, with an 82% decline. Somehow, the most protected areas of wildlife in the advanced civilization of Germany had lost 3/4 of their flying insects by weight in the time since the Berlin Wall fell, which seems quite incredible. It led many scientists and much of the media and the public too to think, if this was happening in Germany, what was happening elsewhere? We were to find out, unfortunately, what was happening elsewhere. If you look half a world away, there was an American entomologist called Brad Lister. He lives and works in upstate New York, and he visited the El Yunque rainforest in Puerto Rico, which is the only rainforest on US soil, a couple of years ago, in order to recreate a survey of insects he did in the 1970s, where he placed these plates with sticky substances on them, on the forest floor and in the tree canopy, in order to ascertain the extent of and the mass of insect life there. In the 1970s, when Lister set these plates out, come back in the morning, he found that the plates were completely blackened with insects. There were just countless numbers of them. On his return, though, a few years ago, he was amazed to find there were any insects around in this kind of seemingly pristine wilderness. This wasn't an area that was deforested for agriculture or for mining. There was no settlements within this rainforest. So there seemed to be no real reason why there would be a lack of insects, and yet there was this lack of insects. That was quite evident to him as soon as he arrived in the forest. He decided to recreate the experiments anyway, and the results were quite astonishing. On the ground, he found 98% of insects by biomass had gone. In the leafy canopy higher up, 80% had disappeared. He told me he found the declines to be absolutely amazing. He couldn't quite believe it. He thought that the idea of insect declines was a little bit fanciful before going and seeing it firsthand himself. The media latched onto this kind of worry, and we've been introduced in the last few years to terms such as insectageddon, insect apocalypse, and so on. I decline to use such terms for my book. I think insect crisis is about enough. We don't need anything more than that. Several entomologists told me they were initially skeptical about all this fuss, but then they started to dig around in their own dusty notes for kind of insect population numbers, and many of them understood what they found that seemed to kind of confirm these kind of declines. What did they find then? Well, we've learned just in the last couple of years, the Netherlands has lost more than 80% of its butterflies since the 19th century. In Britain, butterfly numbers have halved in the past 50 years, and the abundance of flying insects overall has plummeted by nearly 60% since just 2004. I spoke to one rather eccentric scientist in Denmark who'd spent every summer since 1997 driving up and down the same stretch of road in the Danish countryside, his old beat-up Ford Anglia car, and then counted the number of bugs splattered on his windshield. Surprise, surprise, they've become rarer. An incredible 97% decrease since he started doing this. He said anecdotally he could tell that there's been a decrease. Some days he will just drive through the countryside again, seemingly a fairly undisturbed area, not an area with huge industrialization, other than the farming industry, of course, and there were just no insects at all hitting his windshield. His experiment captures what has become to be known as the windshield effect, which has become an easy to grasp concept for those of us who remember perhaps being in a car driving cross country when we were younger and seeing insects matted on the windshield. That's now become a much rarer event. I recently spent a week in Montana and noticed, after I spoke to this scientist, that I had no bugs on my windshield after a week, which is quite incredible if you think about what that means. That means that in quite a kind of sparsely populated state with lots of big open space, no insects for a whole week. More and more of us are noticing this. It's become a kind of symbol of the insect crisis, much like a forlorn-looking polar bear or shrinking sea ice in the Arctic has become the visual embodiment of the climate crisis. This can lead us down several psychological avenues, some of which I explored in the book, such as shifting baseline syndrome, where what we perceive as normal in the world changes as the world changes around us. The most famous example of that is a study that was done a few years ago of pictures of people catching fish off the Florida Keys in chartered fishing expeditions. Over the decades, the fish have got smaller. In the 50s, people would be holding up a fish as large as them. Now the fish is the size of your hand, perhaps, and yet the smiles remain on people's faces. They're paying the same equivalent amounts of money for fishing trips they consider to be a success. We risk the same fading memory of insect abundance as they disappear, like the fish have disappeared off Florida due to pollution, loss of coral reefs, climate change, and so on. The baseline of expectations has shifted for younger people. The idea of driving across country and there being no insects on the windshield will become less and less remarkable until it becomes commonplace. Anyway, on with the list of grim declines. I could go on and on. Unfortunately, in North America, 1 in 4 bumblebee species is in decline and threatened with extinction. Globally, a quarter of all known bee species hadn't had a confirmed sighting since the 1990s. So it doesn't mean that a quarter of all bee species has become extinct, but it's showing there's a lack of confirmed sightings of them, despite more records being kept, which points to quite a serious decline in numbers. We don't know the full story from around the world. After all, we don't know how many insect species there are in the first place. It could be 5 million, 10 million, maybe 30 million. But scientists are increasingly confident and gloomily saying there are widespread declines that threaten profound consequences for us all. The United Nations estimates 500,000 insect species could become extinct by the midpoint of this century. According to one study, which was certainly hotly debated in the scientific world, fairly controversial at the time, insect populations are dropping worldwide on average by about 1 to 2% a year, which points to a sort of oblivion, although I think it's important to say no one expects insects to completely die out. We will probably depart this earth as a species long before them. But why does this all matter? It's a pertinent question because it can be hard to muster any sort of warm feeling towards insects. Leanne is not alone in that. We disparage them as creepy crawlies, and we say that irritating people are bugging us. When filmmakers wanted to turn Jeff Goldblum into a revolting creature, after all, they understandably chose to turn him into a fly rather than, say, a golden retriever. We are culturally, perhaps fatally predisposed to either disliking insects or finding them pointless. Personally, if somebody told me 5 years ago that my first book would be on insects, I'd probably laugh at them. As an environmental reporter, you're drawn to the big, flashy things of the world, the topics you want to write about. You want to go diving on the Great Barrier Reef, or taking a boat through the Everglades, or going to Montana to look at grizzly bears. You don't immediately dream of digging through drawers of dead bugs with bearded men wearing sandals in St. Louis, as I did. But what a revelation it's been. What a wonderful group of people entomologists are, and what a fascinating world they study, the insect world. It was only when this kind of cavalcade of studies came through on insect declines that I started talking to scientists about what was at stake here. I realized this was probably the greatest and yet quietest disaster unfolding in the natural world, perhaps even rivaling the climate crisis itself. So why does it matter? Why is it a disaster? Let me pause here. Excuse me. Well, it matters for a lot of profound reasons, starting with our stomachs, which is a lot of us think about first and foremost on National Wine Day or any other day. Most famously, insects pollinate around a third of the food we eat, everything from almonds to melons to broccoli, tomatoes, and their loss has already been found with crop yields of apples and cherries and blueberries dropping in parts of US and Canada due to a lack of pollinators. In areas of China, teams of people with brushes have previously been sent out to hand pollinate orchards that are bereft of bees. But insects aren't around just to fill our plates. They perform a lot of unglamorous but crucial work that keeps the world ticking over, such as breaking down of feces and dead bodies. One researcher told me about insects who would be living in a world full of poo with their dead Uncle Jeremy floating on past us. Which is quite an image. They are essential for cycling nutrients through soils and plants, keeping the natural world ticking over. They're also, of course, food themselves for both animals and humans. You yank away insects and you disrupt an entire food web that relies upon them. Ecosystems start to falter and collapse. Indeed, in a growing list of countries, birds that dine mostly on insects such as warblers, sparrows and bluebirds are suffering deeper population drops than omnivores like crows and starlings, which is a kind of telling fingerprint of evidence of insect decline. Just a recent 10-year period, an estimated 12.7 million pairs of breeding birds disappeared from Germany, and around 15% of the country's wild avian population gone. In 2018, it was reported that bird populations across the French countryside has slumped by around a third since the turn of the millennium. Almost every indicator of human and planetary health depends, at least upon insects. The whole edifice of life is perched on their slender shoulders. Their loss is already cutting deep. Recent research found that the loss of pollinators is causing around 500,000 early deaths a year across the world due to a reduction in available healthy food. This lack of nutrition is causing an array of health problems. Some foods could certainly become more expensive in rich countries, such as the US, while in poorer developing countries, they may not be available at all. We may even be missing out on potential new medicines. Bee venom has been found to be a possible weapon against certain cancers, while honey is thought to have properties useful in combating heart disease and skin problems. But it's not just the essentials of life we risk, but it's joys too. The world's supply of chocolate, for example, is dependent upon a tiny midge that crawls into the cacao plant and pollinates it. The production of ice cream as well hinges upon insects that pollinate alfalfa, which is in turn eaten by cows. Without bees, there is no coffee. There is little in the natural world that matches the flash of a firefly or the flamboyance of a colourful butterfly. So if you like birds, you like chocolate, You like ice cream and fruits and vegetables and beauty, and not wanting to die a horrible malnourished death surrounded by crap and dead bodies. You really should want insects around. These are all really compelling reasons why. They really do incredible things for us and all other living creatures on Earth. They pretty much prop up the whole edifice of life, as I was saying, on this planet. And we have rewarded them for this by wiping out large numbers of them, making the rest of them deranged or miserable, or being quite rude about them as we do this. We pour our affection and conservation dollars upon big beasts like rhinos, for example, that play very little role in human welfare, while rolling our eyes at insects, which we'd all perish without in a matter of months if they're all to disappear. It's a very odd mismatch. It's a very strange set of priorities we have. So why is this happening? There are three main reasons that scientists would say are to blame for the insects, decline of insects. There are other factors too, which do overlap with these, but the big three I would say are, in summary, habitat loss. So we've cut down around a third of all trees on this planet at the start of the industrial era. We've transformed what were previously complex forests and grasslands and wild meadows, which insects thrive into, featureless monocultural farmland, cities, highways, industrial areas. This has been disastrous for many animals, of course, but particularly insects that need those kind of those habitats. Secondly, there's pesticide use. So not only have we taken away a diverse range of food and shelter from insects, we decided to literally poison them where they remain. The insecticides we use liberally across croplands kill pests such as aphids, but wipe out everything else too, including bees and butterflies and beetles. By one estimate, America's agricultural land is 48 times more toxic than it was 25 years ago. There's even good evidence that this indiscriminate use of chemicals doesn't even improve crop yields. We're riddling our land with poison for little benefit other than to enrich a handful of large agricultural corporations. The third big thing is, unsurprisingly, I would say, is climate change. So previously, scientists thought insects would maybe fare better than other species in the teeth of the climate crisis. This has turned out not to be the case, unfortunately. Insects survive in a fairly narrow band of temperature, with the exception of dragonflies and a few other species of insects. Few of them are able to move very far, very quickly, so they can't escape the temperature being cranked up. We're heightening the temperature of them beyond their ability to withstand that, and we've also thrown off the arrival of the seasons. We've thrown that completely off kilter. Spring is arriving 20 days earlier than it once did in parts of the US. It's throwing off that whole range of interactions between insects and blossoming plants and birds. Again, that's been catastrophic for insects, and unfortunately will only get worse as our world continues to heat up. So the threats are many and varied, but there's, I feel, a kind of unifying cultural driver to this kind of war on insects. We associate them with disease and death and irritation. Some of that is justified if you consider the huge toll from disease-carrying mosquitoes, for example. 2 million people a year dead is a good reason in certain parts of the world to be aware of mosquitoes due to disease, especially as their range is expanding as the world heats up. But it runs deeper than that. We actively teach children to dislike insects. If you speak to entomologists who work with schools, they'd tell you that kindergartners love insects. They think they're fascinating. They think they're cool. By the time in high school, they'll hate them. They think they're pretty gross. We're passing down inherited, learned dislike of the creatures that literally keep us alive. The way we live and see the world is polar opposite to insects' well-being. We value tidiness and order, everything in the right place. We call plants, we consider to be in the wrong place to be weeds, when in fact they are food and shelter for insects. We fetishize the growing and keeping of vast manicured lawns, which has become a sort of symbol of the suburban American dream, but are in fact a wasteland for insects. One of the most startling facts I think I found out while writing this book, that lawns are the largest irrigated crop in America. They're about 3 times larger than all the area given over to corn. The second strangest thing I think I found was speaking to a few people in the world who love mosquitoes. One scientist spent years trying to find ways to genetically engineer their deaths, but then saw one under a microscope and realized how beautiful it was and had an epiphany. Perhaps the third weirdest thing was finding out in the Central Valley of California there are bee brokers, which is an amazing job I didn't know existed before. They match up farmers and beekeepers, kind of matchmaking service for the increasingly scarce pollination services. This job is so lucrative that the bee broker I spoke to works just two months a year. She plays golf the rest of the time. There are also bee rustlers in the Central Valley who steal beehives off the back of trucks because pollination has become so valuable and yet so overstretched. Anyway, if a little sidetrack there, we have these large featureless lawns and large featureless fields of single crops such as soy or corn. These areas have no life in them for insects. It's like a desert. One expert told me it's like all there is to eat is chips. Nothing but chips, even if you don't eat chips or are allergic to them. That's all you have. We have stamped out the scruffy disorder, the wild tangle of different plants and varied habitats insects thrive in. And of course, the natural world has responded in kind. It does not care if the world is populated by lions or cockroaches. After all, it will simply react to change, and we are creating a planet far more hospitable to mosquitoes, cockroaches, and rats than it is to bumblebees and butterflies. When you go through a place that has been manicured to death, it's startling to see what we've lost. You walk through wildflowers and grasses that reach the knee, the insects are bouncing off you, can hear them, you can see them as a kind of thrumming, vibrant, humming oasis of life. It's what it should be. We kind of sanitized our surroundings to such an extent that we've made the world boring. We've pushed nature to the margins. This, I feel, is the key to solving the insect crisis. We need big policy changes on pesticide use and farming practices. And we can see the contours of what that would look like already. The European Union has kind of led the way, incentivizing farmers to put wildlife corridors running along the edge of their fields, rather than leaving nothing there for the insects. They've also banned the worst type of neonicotinoids, which are these most indiscriminately devastating types of pesticides. But although they're still legal, unfortunately, in the US, these chemicals, they're water soluble. They seep into waterways and soils once it rains. They've been found in everything from baby food to onions, and have been blamed for killing off bees and birds, everything from bees and birds and everything in between. So we're seeing countries push forward with progress in bringing back hedgerows, cutting chemical use. We're seeing them push forward also with renewable energy projects to tackle the climate crisis and mobilize dollars to protect the few complex ecosystems we have left. There is encouraging localized action here in the US too. I've seen people who are very enthusiastic about planting milkweed to help monarch butterflies, or I was lucky enough to see a green roof project in New York City where grasses and wildflowers have been allowed to flourish on the roof of a building in a very industrialized area. You stand amongst the greenery in the summer, alive with insects, cooler than the heat radiating all around this, off the rest of the concrete, and you think, why aren't all the roofs like this? So there's a way forward, and we can see what we need to do. But helping insects, I'd say, is also what we don't do. One entomologist put it to me that we need more of an inaction plan rather than an action plan. We just need to be able to let go a bit, to let things slide. We saw during the pandemic, if we don't cut the grass by the highways, the insects come back, then the birds come back. Suddenly there's an oasis of life. It could be all like that, all over urban areas and on the edges of fields without any loss to us financially or otherwise. At home, mow the lawn a little less. Don't rake the leaves as often. Don't put chemicals all over your property. A little bit of laziness may go a long way here. Insects are the great survivors after all. We just need to give them their chance. And they deserve their own place in the world beyond our own needs, of course. I was lucky enough to go to central Mexico just before the pandemic hit to see the annual arrival of the monarch butterfly migration down from the US and Canada. It truly is one of the great spectacles of nature. I took a horse up to the mountains. It was more like Switzerland than Mexico, in this kind of alpine area. We saw these groves of fir trees where there's so many butterflies, millions of them. The branches sagged under their weight. And when they all roused themselves to fly away in this huge orange and black wave, it was sort of like a dream, a waking dream. It was a transcendent moment, something I don't think I'll ever forget. This mass migration, unfortunately, has diminished from what it once was, and it's predicted it will end within a few decades due to climate change that threatens the trees which the butterflies roost upon. The trees cannot outpace the temperature change, and therefore the butterflies will also perish. We're losing a huge amount of beauty from our world as well as utility. Dealing with the insect crisis will take a lot of different actions, both big and small, to turn things around. It won't necessarily be easy. It will involve a lot of some difficult choices, but unfortunately, we don't have another option. We need them far more than they need us. It's time we started acting like it. I'll just end by saying, if you've never visited the marvelous collection of insects at the Smithsonian Museum of Natural History in Washington, DC, I recommend you do so. I had the good fortune to have a chat there with the curator, a man called Floyd Shockley, about the more outlandish ideas to overcome all of this destruction. There's some incredible ideas out there. Maybe we can create an army of robot bees. Maybe, and this feels appropriate to say as Elon Musk is in the news at the moment, we could all relocate to Mars. I just want to read you a passage of what Floyd said about this from my book as we stood beside this huge mounted elephant within the museum. If you put dreams of robot bees replacements on steroids, you arrive at the sci-fi thinking embraces a realistic escape pod by some of humankind relocating entirely from a trashed Earth to Mars or some other planet, terraforming its barren rock face into a new technological utopia, free of the wars and the pollution and the stupidity. Shockley can imagine conversations about such a far-fetched strategy taking place within the nearby halls of US government, but cannot envision, even this is an extreme space-age fantasy, we'll be able to cut our ties of dependence with insects. Obviously, anywhere we want to grow food will probably need bees, he ponders, as tourists take selfies underneath the elephant. We may well be the first invasive species to colonize another planet, but bees will be number 2. So we should do all we can to save insects, because ultimately in doing so, we will save ourselves. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm happy to take some questions.
All right, Oliver, thank you very much for that presentation. You said a lot of interesting things. Just even I almost wish that you had pictures of this. The types of bugs that you named, the assassin fly, that's a like, where's that Marvel movie? I would watch that. Bees have feelings?
Yeah.
Like, do they need therapists? Like what? I love the idea that a fruit fly was the first I guess animal or creature into space. That's a really small space suit. That's very tiny.
Yes.
And I think it's quite interesting that as you were writing your book, you said this, the ants showed up. I mean, maybe perhaps to help, critique, edit,
Yeah.
proofread. I don't know. I
They were
don't
more
know.
fiercest critics for sure.
Oh my goodness. You mentioned, and I'm sorry I didn't get this, your colleague's name, Lister, is that correct? Who did the plates in the rainforest
Bradley,
test, and
yeah.
he did it twice, and he recreated it, and saw, you know, a dramatic decline the second time around. Is it at all possible that the insects had just caught on? They're like, ah, we've seen this plate trick before.
Yeah.
We're not falling for this one. Because I mean, you're telling me that they are way smarter than we think, which is very disturbing for the ants that show up here every spring. That's how I know it's spring. Not the birds, not the buds on the trees. It's the ants in my kitchen.
That's
Um,
true.
and your windshield effect, I realize I have seen that or not seen that. For me, it was the butterflies. When I was little, here I live here in New York City my entire life. I live out in Queens. Yes, we have grass and trees out here, everybody. I remember butterflies, the little white butterflies, and I haven't seen those in a really, really long time.
Mm.
Um, you mentioned, I remember this from your book and from you said it tonight that we're culturally predisposed to not like insects, to be annoyed by them. And little kids think they're cool. Teenagers do not. To be fair, teenagers think nothing is cool. They think everything's icky. But are there cultures that embrace insects more than we do? And what are they doing differently to ensure that so that we get past the teenage ick factor?
Yeah, that's that's a really good question. I mean, certainly, obviously, my book and my, what I've said today is coming from a very kind of westernized kind of
Yeah,
perspective.
yeah.
I mean,
Hmm.
that's my own perspective, and I'm obviously trying to make it as universal as possible. But I have all the biases of who I am, just like we all do. And there's certainly, yeah, cultures in South America, in Africa, and in China where insects are part of the diet quite regularly. They're not seen as disgusting things. They're also, especially in China, used quite and South America, used extensively in medicines. So you have kind of cockroach drinks and things like this to heal
I'm
various
I'm
ailments.
sorry. Okay.
If you want to grind it
I
up into tea, Leanne, then please do so and let us know how that tastes. But that's yeah, that's part of the culture there. Obviously,
okay.
there's a long way, I think, until Americans and Europeans feel quite as comfortable doing that. But we can't say that all humans everywhere dislike insects. I mean, that's just not the
Oh
case.
no, no, no. I was just wondering, you know, what that big difference was. And again, you're right. It would take a very long time to sort of shift that culture. I like your and you said someone else said this, but I think my favorite phrase tonight was in action plan instead of an action plan. Do a little less.
Yes.
I would certainly like that. Um, but yeah, I absolutely enjoyed that. You mentioned minimum three things that most people enjoy, or they know someone enjoys this: chocolate, ice cream, coffee. Is there potentially, and I'm just curious, a way to rope these industries in because they understand very, very clearly where their bread is buttered, so to speak, and where their product comes from? Could they be the folks that sort of uh, issue the rallying cry in such a way that people like me or just a regular person would understand and get that connection? It would, perhaps do it in a funny way, but hey, you still want chocolate, still want ice cream? I love what you said, don't want to die a horrible death. Yay!
Yeah.
Bugs,
All good things.
everybody.
Yeah.
But really, making the business case for, why these industries should partner and promote. Do you see that as a possibility? Is that already being done and I just don't know because I don't know bugs?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right, and I think that will, and we're seeing some of that happen already, kind of unevenly. I think the danger is you get sucked into a, a bigger effort on the status quo system of, mass pesticide use, chemical use,
Oh,
that
okay.
kind of thing, um, rather than the kind of holistic things that insects need to kind of come back. So it requires a kind of rethink of the agricultural system rather than more power given to the agricultural system, if you see what I mean. So yeah, we are seeing some thinking around this, but we still got to catch up with kind of laws and practices around and how we do farming in particular.
Of course. I just want to pop over to our Q&A box and just say we have some very thoughtful comments and questions, and I want to thank everyone who has put in so far. Oren Kennedy, and I'm going to read this because there's to give it context. The book Silent Earth, are you familiar with that, by Dave
Mm.
Wilson? was criticized for drawing conclusions from small data sets. Despite this, my observations of species within different habitats generally follow the pattern shown in Golson's book. Did the criticism assist in the writing of Insect Crisis? Were you able to reinforce or reveal similar issues, but using larger data sets? And what does the data show to direct our recovery priorities to bolster insect habitats and populations? That's a lot, but I hope I said it slowly enough.
Yeah, and I mean, I was very clear in the book, and I hope I was here, that we don't know everything that's going on with all insects around the world. In fact, we just have a few glimpses in mainly Western countries, really, not really in the tropics, not in the Great Rainforest where you see so many insects. So it's not like we got a full, complete picture. And also, up until recently, wasn't seen as important to count them or look at population trends, because why would you? I mean, insects are everywhere. Why would you bother counting them? You'd go and count tigers and elephants instead. So that would be far more interesting and glamorous thing to do. So there is that kind of lack of data, but I think my take on that is, it reminds me so much of the climate change debate, in that, 30, 40 years ago, we didn't know exactly what was going to happen. There was some debate around some of the kind of causes or attributable effects, or how long this trend will last, or that kind of thing. And it turned out the scientists who kind of first introduced this were correct, in that the world was heating up, and it was going to keep heating up the more CO2 we pumped into the atmosphere, and we should act. Instead, we didn't act. We kind of sat on our hands for decades, or denied that it was a problem. I think the danger with the insect crisis is that we kind of either ignore it as being pointless, or kind of query whether it really is happening everywhere. Wait for the kind of full, complete data. I mean, I think all the trends are pointing to huge declines. We can wait around to see if that's everywhere, and then it's maybe too late, or we can act on it now. I think it's better if we act on it now.
Yeah, we're I don't know. We're not really known for that, our species. And that's if we have a blind spot, if we have a weakness, if we, that's what we'll say at the interview, what we're not great at.
Yeah.
Let's see. You did sort of address this, and thank you, Randall, for asking in case anyone came in late. Are populations of birds and bats that eat insects also declining as rapidly as the insect population?
Yeah, birds certainly are. I think there's been fewer studies on bats. Not sure about bats, but certainly there's some really good evidence that birds are declining, not just in kind of industrialized, kind of well-populated places, but even in the heart of the Amazon rainforest. There's been declines of birds found that are insect-eating birds. So that's a good kind of line of evidence that insect declines are to blame, or at least partially to blame.
Steve, this is just a statement, but I will ask or frame this anyway. Oliver, are you familiar with something called the Xerxes Society for Invertebrate Conservation? Am I saying that correctly, by the way?
Yes, named after Xerxes blue, I think, which is an extinct species of butterfly in California.
Okay.
They're very useful, very good group. They do a lot of good work around insect conservation.
Okay. And Richard, this is a wonderful question, but I think I might know the answer. Which parts of the world are in the most danger of losing too many insects? And I know that you made the distinction between the tropics and the Western world and all that, but any guesses, or based on your expertise, who's losing too many?
Well, going by the studies, we have the best kind of research from kind of Western Europe, the US, and those seem to be the places suffering the biggest declines. I think worryingly, though, it's different habitats. Like I was mentioning in the talk, you have the rainforest of El Yunque in Puerto Rico, where almost all insects have been wiped out, this kind of pristine habitat. And you have a similar rate decline in the farmland of Denmark. I mean, these are very different ecosystems. They're used differently, different climates. So it's quite alarming, I think, to see such huge and kind of broadly consistent declines in very different places. So it kind of suggests that there may not be many places that are immune from this trend.
Thank you. Let's see here. Gail, thank you very much for this question. To what extent would more understanding about insect eating cause us to value them more? I believe that we are actually unusual in not eating any insects. Is that true? Or is Western culture unusual? Are we in
A
the
little bit,
minority here?
a
Oh,
little bit,
wow.
a
Okay.
little bit,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, yeah, if you think about the kind of, there are probably more continents where insect eating is fairly normal than those where it's not. Yeah, I think there's a good argument that ironically, by eating insects, we could save them. I mean, you can raise a huge number of insects in a very small area, shipping container or something to raise a load of crickets. You're seeing now companies sell these kind of cricket protein bars or beetles baked in bread and that kind of thing. And by doing that, you replace protein you would get from meat. If you kind of cut out meat a bit from your diet, you would reduce by a large degree the amount of pressure there is with water pollution, air pollution, greenhouse gases, particularly from beef. And those kind of pressures are causing declines of insects as well as other species and heating up our planet and so on. So if you actually substituted a bit of meat eating with insect eating, you could ironically help insects in the kind of broader sense.
So putting bugs on the menu might
Yeah.
help. That's going to be quite the introduction culturally for us to do here. Somebody's got to be brave. You know what? Make it a trendy spot in the city, reservation only, guest list type of thing. Get Kim Kardashian or one of the Kardashians on, and like next thing you know, bugs are hot.
Yeah,
I wish I were joking.
Yeah. Yeah, apparently ants with lime is very tasty, and crickets with some chili powder on them, delicious. But I haven't eaten any myself.
Okay. I will go on record as saying I am not ready. But I'm also not ready for my planet to be swept out from under me. I'm only this much of a Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy fan. Don't want the Vogons coming. Kenneth Schwartz wants to know, how important is the cultivation of native plants? I guess that's maybe asking, would that help, that goes to your theory of doing less to bring back or to sort of house our native insect populations. Would that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, native pollinators like native plants. That's what they've grown up with. If you just stock your garden with kind of ornamental species from overseas, and the local insects won't know them and can't thrive on them. So certainly, native plants is a really good way of helping bring back pollinators. Yeah. So yeah, I'm all for that.
David Little has an interesting question, and just to give it some context in our final minutes, we'd like to have, his family would like to have a wildflower garden and also encourage wildlife, including insects, to populate. But what do we tell our neighbors with the perfect lawns that hate bugs? How do you have that neighborly conversation?
Yeah, and that's difficult because I've spoken to people who've had knocks on the door from their neighbours saying your lawn's overgrown, I'm going to mow it for you, or you're bringing down the look of the neighbourhoods. And I kind of tend to think that HOAs, these homeowners associations you have in the burbs across the country, are potentially a really big barrier because they try and have this uniform look of mostly mown lawns and that kind of thing. And there's almost like a cultural shaming, isn't there, if you let your lawn grow too big. So what I would say, I mean, be polite, don't tell them to
You're right.
any rude words. Maybe
Get off my lawn, literally.
yeah, don't go Clint Eastwood on them. But you can certainly kind of spread the good word about why this is kind of kind of good for the natural world. You're bringing back insects, which are beneficial to our world, and also just more interesting. It's more interesting and vibrant than just lawn, which is so boring. It's kind of like same. Why would you not want some kind of color and interest and variety? I think there's a lot of arguments for letting things go a little bit wild.
Right. Not the teenagers though, but just the plants. Well, the
Yeah.
teenager is gonna do what they want to do. Oh
Right.
my goodness. I'm Oliver, thank you so much for this presentation. And thank you for remembering, and that I did say up front, and anyone who knows me says that knows that I'm bug phobic, but this was really actually informative for me, and I am looking at it in a different way. And I think that was the I guess the purpose of your book. And I know you don't have a copy, but everybody, this is a copy of Oliver's book. If you enjoyed this talk and you want to, get some more from information, it's a good read. Please do grab a copy. And again, Oliver, I appreciate your time here. And I just want to let anyone know that if you missed any um, of this presentation, this talk tonight, it has been recorded and it will be available tomorrow for you to catch up, rewatch, and share at skepticalenquirer.org. As always, my thanks to Skeptical Inquirer, the Center for Inquiry, tonight's producer, Mike Powell, and of course, a big thanks to all of you in the audience. And my name is Leanne Lord. Thank you. Good night to you, Oliver, and everyone in the audience. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say good night to the legendary Tina Turner, who I'm sure loved bugs. Oliver, have a good night. Be well.
Thank
Thank you for
you.
joining
Thank
us.
you.